A pleasant good afternoon to everyone. My name is Priscilla Liebert-Calder. I'm the event coordinator here at the NJSBDC at Rutgers-Newark. And on behalf of Dr. Tandai Ndoro, the regional director, I would like to welcome you to our webinar today called How to HR Pivot After COVID-19. For those of you who are unaware, the New Jersey Small Business Development Center at Rutgers-Newark is the premier provider of business training and technical assistance services to established small businesses and startups and entrepreneurs in New Jersey, more in particularly in Essex County. We are one of 12 centers in the NJSBDC network, and our center is hosted by the Rutgers Business School and funded through a public-private partnership agreement between the United States Small Business Administration, Rutgers University, and the New Jersey Business Action Center. Our mission is to help entrepreneurs and business owners start and grow sustainable, successful businesses through the delivery of one-on-one business consulting, training, and technical assistance programs. For the benefit of those who are attending today's webinar, audio should be muted. We have a small group for today's webinar, so I think we could be able to use our microphones to ask questions, but we'll play it by ear a bit. But generally, we ask that you post your questions via the chat or the Q&A feature here on the Zoom application. We'll do our best to respond to these questions either during or at the end of the presentation. A copy of the presentation slides that you're seeing, along with a video recording of this webinar, will be emailed out within 48 business hours at the end of this presentation. Again, I'm going to mention, if you can just mute yourselves. If you do have a question, feel free to unmute and ask your question, but please, for the benefit of everyone else, once you've asked your question, you can unmute, but if you are uncomfortable with that, it is preferred that you use the chat box. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Ms. Ginny Rock-Bailey. Ginny Rock-Bailey, she is the president and owner of Rock-Bailey Enterprises, an HR firm. She's also an SBDC consultant here at the NJSBDC at Rutgers-Newark, specializing in human resources and certifications for small businesses. So some of you may, if you've interacted with us, if at any point you tried to get a minority or a woman business enterprise certification, you may have run into Ginny, or you will if that is one of your needs in the future. So without further ado, I will turn today's presentation over to Ginny.
Thank you so much, Priscilla. I hope everyone can hear me. If you can't, please let me know. Today's presentation, as indicated on the screen, is about HR and COVID and the relationship between human resources and COVID. What I decided to do is to share some of my experiences as an HR consultant and my clients in regards to going remote, coming back to the office, personnel issues that they've had, what are some of the benefits that we need to address, what are the plans that we need to have in place in order to make either activity successful. And I'm not an attorney, don't play an attorney, but I am a human resources best practice guru or expert. And I have that moniker because of the diversity of my clients and how I'm able to look at each client's situation, categorize them, and come to certain conclusions about what would be the best human resources, service, outcome to provide for them. So when we decided to do something about human resources and COVID, I thought it would be best if I could provide a forum for the participants to ask a question if there is one about human resources and a challenge that you have. I don't have all the answers, but as an SBDC consultant, I will certainly get back to you. But what I thought was more important was to share some information about what the CDC, the World Health Organization, OSHA, and some best practices are in regards to what you need to know to be safer from an employer standpoint and also from a human resources standpoint. And I think what's so interesting about this topic in human resources is so often human resources is categorized in a way that since we don't produce money, we may not be as important to an organization as we really are. But with COVID and the role that human resource professionals and practitioners are playing to make sure that their employer is making the environment safer is part of the business continuity now. Discussions around COVID and movement and employees and expectations are not being had unless human resources is at the table. So I thought this was a great opportunity for me to just share some of my experiences. If some of the information that I share with you, you already know, please bear with me because I have to present on the fact that participants know a lot, know much, want to learn. So I'm making the presentation so broad that hopefully all of you can learn something from it. So let's get started. So this is who I am. I'm the human resources guru, and as Priscilla said, I also provide certification services for the center. The points of discussion for today are our preparedness and response plan, developing policies and procedures for a prompt ID and isolation, workplace flexibility, human resources and COVID-19, workplace controls, and administrative controls. And feel free to ask a question. When it comes to develop preparedness and response plan, you have to look at what the federal, state, local, tribal, and other territorial properties are saying about that. With COVID, it was all of these bodies that have had an input into what is being suggested we do. And what I also found very interesting about preparing this is that when you look at those three entities, the WHO, OSHA, and the CDC, and you look at what they've prepared and recommended, it just seems as if you took COVID off of the title, that it would be risk-averse practices in general. So that's what I found that was very interesting. And so for those companies who haven't paid much attention to the risks that they're taking as far as their employees, business strategies, plans for the future, if you don't look at their risks, then you can often suffer by not being prepared in that way. So the development of the preparedness and response plan, I'm giving you some examples of what you should think of. how might workers be exposed? And this should be part of your plan, that discussion. Where could they have gotten it? How are they exposed to it? What are some of the non-occupational risk factors that could play into their exposure? What are the workers' individual risk factors? And this is so important because when you think about their individual risk factors, you're also crossing a line in terms of their personal life. What risk factors may they be involved in from a personal standpoint? But this is part of the conversation. You also have to think about addressing the controls necessary to address those risks. What can we as an organization, or what I as a business owner, what can I do to address those risks that my staff might be exposed to in their daily lives and at work? You have to increase the rate of you have to consider the increased rate of workers' absenteeism when you look at all of the other factors that I've given you. And you think about, what can I do as an employer? And some of the things we're already doing, and that was a little bit consoling to me as I was preparing this. And maybe it's because we've been back at work for a while, or we've made the decision to be more conscious of making our employees safer. But some of the things that we've done, we've implemented social distancing, we've staggered work shifts, we've downsized our operation. And not because that there was a want to do it, but it was a must to do it, to make sure that our employees were safe. And when you think about the controls that we need to address to not encounter some of these risks, you think about things like tissues, more trash disposals, cleaning, partitions up in the office. And when I think about these preparedness and response plans, I think about how the discussions that I've had with my clients in regards to how are we going to pull this off? I mean, it got down to that because we knew we were going to work, but how are we going to do this? And I'm going to share some of those things that we developed to make our leaving and our coming back not seamless, but safer for the employee, for our employee, and how it taught us all, including the employees, a valuable lesson on how to not avoid risk, but be prepared for risk internally and externally. It also allowed us to look at how delivering our services remotely and other exposures that reduce some of the measures that we had decided. Options for conducting essential operations with a reduced workforce. Let me know if you can see the whole screen, because I want to make sure that, and you're also going to get this. I want to make sure that you're able to see everything. Options for conducting essential operations with a reduced workforce. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more as we proceed, but I think it's important as you think about this preparedness plan, similar to a personnel policies and procedures manual, but it's more on an operational level. There are things that you have to think of that are outside of your normal behavior as far as an owner or a human resources practitioner. And when you think about essential operations, we think about essential functions, but in this place, we had to in this space, this COVID space, we had to dissect the organization to see what we needed right now, what we could hold off on. But the goal for all of my clients was to stay working. keep our employees employed. How are we going to do that? Now, I'm not talking about a large corporation or a mid-sized corporation. I'm talking about small businesses who knew that the business was there, but how are we going to continue to provide the service in a safe atmosphere? Also, we have to look at the interrupted supply chains or delayed deliveries. And here, I think what we've seen, which is novel, which some restaurants are going to continue, is this whole service of curbside service. I don't know why it wasn't thought of before. It might have been, but I know the fact that it is part of the normal way of doing business now is part of business continuity, and at all cost, not at all cost, but in keeping our business safer, we have to implement these measures. So you develop policies and procedures for prompt ID and isolation. And I include the federal, state, local, tribal, and our territories in this is because I looked at where I am. I'm in New Jersey, I'm in New York, and I looked at what was happening here. But when I began to read about the different voices that were involved, I could understand why the recommendations were so expansive. And even though they may not have applied to my clients or my locations at one point, the fact that they were available to us to consider made our steps even more valuable and made our efforts even more appreciated by our workforce. So then we looked at how flexible are we going to be, and I'm going to go more into detail in these two. And when we considered workplace flexibility, which is a chapter in your plan, we thought about what did that really mean? In other parts of our business, or in other times where we had to look at our business and make some decisions, we didn't consider the word flexible. We consider the terminology part-time, seasonal, intern. When you look at employees, we didn't. When you look at it in terms of how flexible you are or you can be, you think about how you can make additional reasonable accommodations to keep your employees employed. And how do you do that? What are some of the techniques that you use to do that? And just for an example, we looked at our staff, which in some terms, for some clients, they were full-time, part-time, and we had interns. How could we keep them all working? Because they're not all working on client-to-client services for our companies, but how could we keep them working and engaged? So it took more thoughts, more minds around the table to discuss this whole issue of workplace flexibility. Then we took a deeper dive into human resources and COVID. And what COVID was making us do. Because with human resources, you look at employee relations, you look at benefits, you look at communication tools, and we had to break all of those down. And in many instances, my clients have employee handbooks and personnel policy manuals. We had to pivot in a way that made sense, was legal, and fit into the culture of the organization. So when we looked at our policies, we had to look at hiring policies. We had to look at recruiting. We had to look at onboarding, because none of our business stopped while we were remote, nor when we came back. And this is for all of the clients. And we're very fortunate. Believe me, I understand how fortunate we were. But it gave us an opportunity to look at human resources from a bigger and broader perspective, because then we had to look at all of the, we had to look at all of the items that were involved. We had to look at all the departments that were involved. We had to look at all of the people that we had to address. And we had to look at, we had to look at what was the role of human resources in this position during this time. So there were a number of factors that played into the role of human resources and what the decisions were. Then we also had to look at our workplace controls, from administration to if we were in a building, what could we ask for from the building while we were remote, or when we came back. If we were remote, we wanted to make sure that if we had access, things would be available. Water, all of those things that we take not advantage of, but assume are working. We had to make sure that there was someone there if we needed to get back to the office, or if we needed to have access to someone in the building. All of those controls were there for us to do that. So then we looked at the administrative controls. And for small businesses, when you think about administrative, so often, you know, the president is the secretary, is the bookkeeper, is everything. And if that was the case in some of the small businesses, then in those different roles, that individual had to show up. What was being asked upon them? What was being asked of them to ensure that questions that were being answered on a general or management level were going to be responded to? What were the controls that we needed? Whether it was making sure everybody had a Surface, had access to the system, had their phones were equipped with the mobile apps that they needed. We had to make sure that those things were taken care of. And these kinds of questions cannot be answered in a bubble. It was at this time that we realized that all hands were on deck, regardless of what the industry was, regardless of how many people worked there. We needed input from everyone when it came to making the transfer successful, continuing the business, and making the return to the office successful. So I'm giving you, I think these are 7 or 8 points, because each resource that I use that's available to each one of you go into more detail about how you can accomplish these goals, because ultimately they become your goal. And your goal is to keep your business running if you can at different levels, with different operational needs, with different number of employees, which may have to rotate, or we may have to add shifts. What is it going to take for us to make our business operational and to also ensure that our staff was safe? Because at the end of the day, and I'm going to give you some statistics, at the end of the day, what was the most important for all the employers was the fact that whether they were working remotely or whether they knew they were going to come back, they had to trust us in making the decision that we were going to make them safer. We couldn't commit to making them safe always, but we were going to do everything that needed to be done to make them safe. And I can tell you that designing a manual that looked at these services, these activities was like having a blueprint for us to refer to, because we'd never been through anything like this before. I've been in human resources for a long time, and I can remember different national disasters and what we had to do. But when it came down to, we have X number of days to either leave the office or make the transition back because of whatever our industry was, and wherever that placed us, we realized how important it was for everyone, intern to senior leadership, to have a voice in the tactics that we were going to use. And what was also very interesting is it also gave employees the opportunity to speak out. Some people didn't speak out on anything. They had a job, they were happy. They knew that the owners were going to take care of them as much as they could, but and they always knew that they were invited to participate. But when it came to making this HR pivot, it was not only an invitation, it was an invitation to participate, but it was an invitation to become engaged. And that was really important for everyone involved. You have to become engaged. So let me check and see if there's any questions. No questions. Excellent. So when it came time for us to make the decision that, staff, and this is across the board, because in my practice, because I have such a diverse client base, I can make conclusions from a human resources perspective that can apply across the plane, because it's human resources and we're dealing with people. So when it came time to make the decision for employees to work at home, we had to ensure that the staff meetings that we were having every day in the office, we were going to continue to have remotely. We had to make sure that during those staff meetings, initially, they could come on the call with, we don't know what on. We really didn't know what was on, but we knew that they were on the call. But what we also decided to do during these staff meetings was invite people, since they were all Zoom or platformed. So we would invite subject matter experts to come in and talk about what was happening and give us all some information and some advice on how we can make this seamless. Because many people like working at home, some don't, but there was no option. So it was during one of our staff meetings where we had invited someone to come in and talk about what agencies were still open but didn't have the same hours. They didn't have the same flexibility nor access to the people that we wanted to talk to. But they came on to let us know that this is how you can reach them. We realized that some people were attending our staff meetings and not the best of attire. So we decided that when we were having a guest, and it was known well in advance, that they had to come on the staff meeting as if they were coming to work. They had to dress up. They had to wear work attire. And and initially it was like, why do I have to do this? I'm home, I'm in my PJ sweats, nobody's seeing me. But what happened when we made that pivot, we got a better level of participation from our staff. They became more engaged in coming up with ideas of how they could make working at home better. They designed icebreakers before the staff meetings. They designed more opportunities for staff who may not have been as close as others, formed buddies, so that if there was a conversation or a question that they wanted to ask offline, they felt more comfortable doing it because of the relationships that they had formed during these staff meetings. What also became very interesting for us is that we had to address the issue that, yes, you're working. And since you're working, you know, our expectations of you working are similar to those expectations that we have while you're in the office. Well, we realized that that was unfair because so many of them had children that were home as well. So we had to be more sensitive to the needs of our employees in regards to they're doing double, triple duty. And so how can we make this um, more seamless for them to work and also spend valuable time with their family? So we designed individual quote unquote contracts with some employees who were having a difficult time. And in those agreements, we looked at what would be the best time for you to take care of certain aspects of your position. What would be the best time for you to make phone calls? What would be the best time for you to reach out to other staff? What would be the best time for you to do these things that you needed to get done? So it allowed us to value what they were doing, and it allowed our staff to see that we continued to value them and we wanted to make this work. And once that happened, I can't say that it was 100% participation because it wasn't participation into these agreements. But what happened is we saw more staff wanting to make it work even more because we became more flexible to their working at home, being remote. Another thing that we did too, and I'm going to back up a minute, is if the client could, they provided the hardware for them. So if it was a Surface everyone needed, or if they needed some other tablet, or if they needed more access to our server, we made that easier for them than it would have been under other circumstances. So, and it wasn't because we weren't, it wasn't my recommendation to look at as an attendance and accountability tool. It was my recommendation and the owner's recommendation and agreement that we wanted to replicate their office life as much as possible. And whether it was those who really didn't want a tablet, took it, but really wasn't really comfortable with the tablet, we made sure that they had the technical assistance that they needed to make sure that they could come on, participate, and feel comfortable in asking if they needed some tutoring on how to navigate through this process. And when we looked at this, we realized that we were really adhering to some of the guidelines in the CDC, WHO, and OSHA preparedness plans. It wasn't something that it wasn't so conscious as it was necessary to make sure that people felt comfortable. And to also let people know how grateful we were that we were still able to work. So the attendance and the accountability piece was an issue across the board with my clients, because some workers felt that they could, some staff people felt that they could sleep longer, miss the staff meeting, or what have you. And then we had to have a talk. We had to, through Zoom, I'm zoomed out, but through Zoom, we had to make sure that they understood that, yes, you're home, but you're still at work. So if it's a 9 o'clock staff meeting or a 7 o'clock staff meeting, or if it's a 10 o'clock meeting between you and your colleague, you have to show up and be on time, because that was what the job called for, and it was disrespectful if you didn't. So we were able to make that transition from the office to the home, not seamless, but workable. And what we always knew is that when we returned to the office, there was a possibility that we may have to go back to working remotely. So even though that was always in their minds, it was my recommendation with the owner that where you are is where you're working right now, and it is our intent to make sure that it is a seamless process. And that if you have any questions at all, you always have access to people who have answers, even if you're home, regardless of the time of day. Because at some point, some staff in some of the organizations were working on a later shift or on another shift, because that's what we needed them to do. So that's working at home. So when it came time to return to work, not only did we have to take those practices that we were working with in remotely to the office, everyone had to wear a mask. And it wasn't really that difficult to get them to wear a mask. The guidelines are suggesting, depending on where your organization is, the state law was mandatory. You, as owners, we had to be in a position to make sure that it was conveyed that not only was it for the benefit of your coworkers, it was also for your benefit as well. And we also had to make sure that we had masks, PPE, sanitizers, tissues, more receptacles. We had an office situation where, as I think I said earlier, where we already had our separations for the cubicles. That was already there for one organization, but for others, they made sure that they were there when we returned. But so the masks weren't as not offensive, but weren't as not acceptable as we thought they would be. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that everybody wore them. It was not a big deal. And I laughed because I thought that at some point it had to do with the fact that they remembered what they looked like before the mask. Because that was difficult to look at, to look at your colleague in a mask and not knowing whether they're smiling, not knowing, and we talked about this during our staff meeting, about the difference between the mask and no mask, especially since our Zoom meetings, you show up as you are. But here in the office, we have these masks, and they're part of our everyday dress code. They're part of, the way we do business. We haven't none of our clients have gotten to the point where we are allowing visitors. People drop things off, we pick them up, we meet them, we do those kinds of things. Where we haven't had visitors come to the office, but when we're ready, we have forms that they have to complete, and most of them will come because of a scheduled meeting. So it's not like they're unwelcomed or unwanted. We know why they're here, and we can set everything up for them. Feel free to answer a question if you have one. I think sometimes it's better to get them out now. Let me just go back. Oops. I mean, one of the challenges, that was one of them. One of the challenges, I think, that we all realized that, not that we had, but we had challenges in navigating through this, navigating through this new type of doing business, was that we could all learn. I don't remember a situation where anyone who had a challenge of getting on a Zoom meeting, and please, I know about that, getting on a Zoom meeting or making sure that the lighting's right, making sure that you have your documents available that you can share screens. Many people, many of the employees hadn't had that kind of an experience, nor had they been on a platform meeting. It was always one-on-one. And we took the time to, you can do this. We're there for you. I think even when it came down to adjusting to what being back in the office meant for everyone. So you can be in a building and have a cleaning staff that will take care of the cleaning for you. And you will get a part of this presentation, and I'm also going to give you some flyers. I think my handouts are flyers from different organizations that speak to the necessity of adhering to some of these laws. So it's not just going to their sites, but being reminded of them as you post these flyers or as you duplicate these flyers. And the one of the not so good feel moments for staff was the fact that they could not interact the way that they had in the past. And so I have this picture of using on a keyboard, a laptop and a keyboard. And I'm reminded of how difficult it was for people to not get out of their cubicle and go to the next cubicle and say, even with a mask, and want to share something with them. How difficult it was for them to not be able to say, look, I can show you how to do this function. Slide over, I'll show you. That day is gone. I'm not saying it'll be gone forever, because I don't, what is forever? But I know at this point in time, what they're asking of us as owners, as human resources professionals, and as colleagues, they're asking us to think twice before you act. Think twice before you take that step to address an issue physically, whether it's correcting the screen, whether, like I said, the keyboard. The phone was another issue, because we have, not only do we have our cell phones, but we have the business phones. Their suggestion is that if you don't have to use it, don't use it. Transfer the call. But if you have to, it must be cleaned. That's what our guidelines are. Our common rooms, our coffee rooms, our areas where water fountains are kept, all of that was changed because we had to make sure that we had the people in place that could take care of those needs. So when we talk about the people in place, often for some businesses, it's training staff to perform these functions on a rotational basis. And if you're going to do that, you have to have PPEs in place. You have to have the appropriate cleaners, cleansers in place. You have to know what surfaces something will land on and stay longer than something else. And so there's training involved in that. And you have to make sure that you provide that training for your staff. You have to make sure that they feel as if they are a part of the decision making, and that they also feel that they're safe. And coming back to something so similar as the office, yet so different, especially when the caveat on top of all of that is that at no time will all of the employees be in the office at the same time. So it went back to the flexibility of the company to making sure that those who work together were in the office together. Those who needed to work with someone else were in the office together. So it was a check and balance. If you needed to work with someone on Friday and that wasn't your day or their day, then you emailed a request and we made it happen. Social distancing. I think there was a joke where it was like, it is a form of social dancing? Maybe, but not. But it became so necessary because it allowed us again to not only cross boundaries, but it allowed us the space where we felt comfortable enough in talking with somebody and talking with a colleague or anyone. And you felt safe enough or safer because we put these practices in place. And I think another thing that helped us was the fact that our workers would talk to their family members or their colleagues, and companies were uniformly doing this. It wasn't as if we were the only ones asking them to do it. They were uniformly doing this. So, and for those who chose not to, that was their choice, but it didn't get in the way for us mobilizing and wanting to make sure that we were as safe as we possibly could be in the adjustments and in the social distancing. So I usually don't give statistics because people are like, well, where'd you get this from? But when we looked at, and this was a study of 1,500 people through a HR think tank, when they looked at how many people were worried about workplace exposure due to COVID, it was 51%. And we understood that because it's not like the decision makers weren't a little worried themselves, you know. But then when we looked at how many people had confidence in their employees that they were going to bring them back in as safe a workforce as possible, it was 71%. And we knew, not that we did our survey, which is a good idea. I should go back and do the surveys. It's not that we did our surveys, but it was the reaction to what we were doing. We knew that the percentage was high. And we knew that for those who needed adjustments, that we could provide that to them as well. If they needed a little bit more time, we could provide that to them as well. But it's not like human resources didn't continue to act as the service that continued performance evaluations, that wrote disciplinary action emails, that provided information on additional training that they could use. It wasn't as if human resources internally and externally did not continue to provide that service, but we did it with a different goal in mind. The goal was always to provide the best service. The goal was always to make employees feel comfortable. But the goal was also to comply with the guidelines of CDC, state and local government, the federal government, and the other expanded recommendations that were given by those bodies. That was our goal, and we were open about it. So then we look at we had no choice but to look at the rise of COVID and where it was rising, and you know, what my companies were going to do. And we adhered to our plan. We revised, we maintained it, we devised it, we maintained it, we were consistent in its application. And when COVID rose and we had to pivot, we made those changes in the plan. We looked at our sick policy, we looked at our calling out policy, and we looked at what were we to expect based on those two items, but based on those two activities and how we were to respond. Our sick policy, we were guided by not only our sick day plan that we had, our sick leave policy, but what this also made us do is ensure that our records were kept up to date. Because if somebody was going out sick because of whatever reason, whether they had symptoms or whether they had it or what, we wanted to make sure that they knew what their eligibility of days were. We wanted to let them know that we were aware of the law, and we also wanted to let them know that our goal for them was to come back. We also wanted to let them know that what calling out did, because of now that we're back in the office, we depended on each other even more than when we were remote, because we knew that because of the requirements, if only 50% of us could be in the office at the same time, what you had to offer, we needed. So we made it incumbent upon them to understand that while we were back in the office, the only thing that really, it wasn't the only thing, but the major change was adhering to COVID, but it was really business as usual when it came to expectations of you as a staff person. And we still had an open door. The door was open more then than it was before, because people had, they had some misgivings about things, or maybe they saw something that they didn't really think was in line with our plan, the goals, or our culture. And they wanted to alert us to that. And it wasn't blind, it was factual. And in the past, when someone said prompt and immediate action, that's what the law says when you're going to do an investigation on sexual harassment, discrimination, workplace harassment. The law is asking you to take prompt and immediate action. It was more prompt and immediate at this point because the end result was so much more important. Not that it was diminished in any way, but it was more important. So we wanted people to, we wanted our staff to know that. Before I go to the next slide, is there any question? Please unmute yourself if you have one. Any question on anything I've said?
And so finding these
Excuse me, I can't hear you.
Black and brown roommakers, these are really challenging tasks, and we've committed ourselves to
all I know is
people know the stories.
I gotta do some real research to get black doctors. To get a black doctor to give birth for me.
I'm sorry, I can't, there's some background noise. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. What was the question? Okay, no question? Employee benefits. Again, we looked at, what our benefits were in terms of healthcare, what our benefits were in terms of holidays, what our benefits were in terms of retirement plan, pension plan. We looked at them and we tweaked them, or we're making the recommendations to tweak them based on what's happened. With employee benefits, we may have to look at other carriers that may be more amenable to what we want to do. But we're going through that process. Every day we're going through that process. And CDC gives you the guidelines of what to look for, what to ask for. When I was looking for benefits for a smaller company, I could never find, or I couldn't find healthcare benefits for the company with 20 or less employees. I was shocked now post-COVID that I was able to find a carrier who would take an employer that had less than 20 employees. So the changes are going to take time, but if we're in it to make the difference, then that's what we are going to have to do. I suggest that that as employers and as professionals in human resources, that you call on your professional organizations, you call on the medical community to assist you in making these decisions. Because the wider the pool is of recommendations based on their experiences, the better your chances are of making the right decision for your organization. And this is not the time to wait. We are actively working on adhering to the guidelines and maintaining our preference of being a preferred employee, a preferred employer. That's what's working for us. Questions? Let's see if there's a question over here. I just want to make sure that, you know, and again, no, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer. I just know that these practices worked for us. These practices were definitely a part of what made our transitions out and back in successful. Again, look at your sick leave policy, make sure that it adheres to your state and local laws. Update your employee benefit plans if you can. If you're not offering them now, seek out and see if you're able to do that. Update your spending and flexible accounts, your COBRA policy. Look at how changes may be able to be made to your COBRA policy. I mean, these are the times where as small businesses, we can really make a difference. The challenge is there. The challenge exists, but how can we make our time within the organization better for everyone involved? It's so many things that I want to share with you about these issues that I learned, even, and I may be getting a little ahead of myself, but even in regards to recruiting. We have openings, we want to bring people in. Every interview is through a Zoom meeting. The first time we're meeting someone is through a Zoom meeting. And it's interesting because most of the candidates are aware of it. Some have no clue. And so that's not a disqualifier. It's just an invitation for them to put Zoom on your mobile, upload it on your computer, your desktop, your laptop, whatever. But this is how we're doing business. Question? Yes.
Well, I pay a dime, so.
There's someone. Could you mute your phone, please? Some of the employee practices that again that we had, we hired, we fired, and we laid off. We brought new employees in based on our recruitment practices that we tweaked for COVID. In our policies, we didn't have that interviews would be done on a platform, but we had to amend our human resources policy. And so let me again take you through this preparedness and response plan that can complement your human resources policy manual or employee handbook, or you can merge it in to those policies. Some clients wanted them to complement so they could exactly see what they were doing in the past and what they were called to do now. When it came to terminations, we were very careful about how we terminated. But if you met the criteria for no longer working for the company, we were sensitive, but we had to let you go. And then when we let people go, we also had to be aware of the fact that if they applied for human resources, for unemployment, even though we had a justified reason of letting them go, 9 times out of 10, they were going to get it. 10 times out of 10, they were going to get it. Whereas in the past, we fought every one of them. So now it was just go to unemployment. And if we did If we did refute, it didn't matter, they still got it. And so then a part of us understood, even though there was cause for hiring, these are unprecedented terms, so we moved on. We moved on. For businesses that have to lay off, you have a layoff policy. If you didn't have it before, you have a layoff policy, and know that when it's time to rehire, you have to consider and or bring that person back. That was the key. You had to bring them back, or you had to at least consider them, let them say that they didn't want to come back because of a variety of reasons. And for some, it was that I did not want to work. I didn't want to work back in the office. I like, being at home. I'm going to find something where I can satisfy that. So under employee practices, which remain, we conduct our performance evaluations one-on-one. We had counseling sessions. We managed to run the business based on the needs of the business. And after a while, being back in the office in a COVID world doesn't seem normal, but it's not abnormal, if that makes any sense at all. It's not normal as if something that we did before, but it's not abnormal because it's working. It's working for us. And so I got a little ahead. We recruited on the platforms. We knew then that we must be flexible. Our background checks for some clients were delayed. And that's another thing, you think that we had to adjust as small businesses, but so did the government agencies, so did motor vehicles, so did planning departments, so did all of these, our auditors our government auditors had to adjust because this was a different world. So we had to be flexible. So in some instances, we did delay the background check. And depending on how much that position was needed, we delayed them and brought them in. It also allowed us to really look at our job descriptions and make sure that we truly knew what the essential functions of those positions were, because we just couldn't. And every job description for each client, I'm thinking about this now, was tweaked. We had to put a COVID related, some tasks were removed, even though they might have been temporary, but they couldn't have been done. So we didn't want to hold them accountable for them if they couldn't do it. So we wanted to make sure that we were in a position to be as transparent as possible when it came to recruiting. Onboarding was remote, and it worked. It really worked. I mean, onboarding remotely worked. We had all the documents ready. They could go on their platform and fill out their new W-2s, W-4s rather. They could go on and complete those. I mean, everything was ready for them. And I go back to the fact that we had a plan. We had a plan to make this work to the best of our ability. And even our snafus, we could correct and adjust. Our HR policies. When you think about your policies, you may have them in chapters. State and federal policies, employee practices, employee benefits, communication, safety, whatever policies you need outside of those mandatory policies, we looked at, and for those that needed to be tweaked, we tweaked them. Because we wanted to make sure that the policy manual is up to date and reflected what our new responsibilities were from the COVID world, and that they met the needs of our business as well as reflected the culture of our organization. So even when it came to the disinfectants, the cleaning of the office, we had safety policies that addressed, if you leave a file drawer open and somebody falls over it, that worker's comp, we don't want that. Be more careful of leaving file drawers open. But now the policies became more intentional because we had to look at um, the cleaning processes that are mandatory to make sure that you decrease the exposure your employees can have to this virus. And we lifted the policies up and we put them in our policy manual. And again, CDC, WHO, and OSHA, they have them. They're verbatim. Even though I found interesting, I found the CDC policies written a little in a more liberal form. They're there for you to understand. And then it also created opportunities for our businesses to find businesses that could provide these cleaning products to them. And so they sought out small businesses to do that. So it became a B2B experience for a lot of our businesses, which they hadn't even considered. And so that process expanded how in the COVID world and after the COVID world, we will be able to use these businesses to provide us with the services that we need. So the cleaning policies became if I had to move them up in the book, they became second in the book when it came to the mandatory policies, the state and federal policies. And give you an example here of where it is necessary for you to ensure that this is second nature to you, whether it's your keyboard or you're using someone else's, whether it's your mouse or someone else's. It's second nature to you to make sure that it's clean. Found this picture and I talked about it earlier because instead of working remotely, the language became working at home, and we had to, as our staff would say, decrease the crazy, because it was so hard for people to see that I'm home, but I have to work, for family members to buy in that. So it was incumbent upon us to have, even if it was an email to the family, understanding we know that this isn't normal and we thank you for your patience. We did everything we possibly could to make sure that this wasn't just a one-on-one relationship. And this picture reminded me of a conversation that I had with an employee about how am I going to make this work. It's going to make this work because we have to make it work. You're valuable, we have to make it work. So she sent a similar picture to us about this is how I'm making it work. And it's like the report is on the way. So every effort was made to do this. Being in the mix now is synonymous with, it's second nature. It's the way we're doing business. It is the way that I know that our staff is safe. It's the way that I know our employees benefit from what we're doing for them. And, this is a story and these were techniques that I wanted to share with you. I mean, again, staying at home works, and it works when you are prepared. So at this time, I'd like to answer any questions that you may have. If there's anything that, you want to revisit, please do so now. Anything that you want, let me just go over, hold on. Look in chat. Hold on. Yes. Oh, I guess that you're telling me you heard me. Please use this as an opportunity to ask me questions. Use this as an opportunity to see how this can fit into your experience. These are some of the topics that we covered. Preparedness and response plan. You can get a guide from the CDC on how to do it. Make sure you incorporate your culture. Make sure you incorporate those responses that are legal and recommended, and that you can adhere to them. Make sure that it becomes a living document like your employee handbook. Your employee handbook isn't fixed. It's not time sensitive. It's living. It grows as your company grows. It grows as as the law grows and the law changes. And so you want to make sure that your preparedness and response plan are meet the requirements, they're maintained and they're revised. And also you want to make sure that you start using language like risk averse and flexibility, because all companies are risk averse, but we don't look at how we can adopt those, those techniques to diminish it. And even though, you know, COVID is here and it's requiring us to do these things, there are other organizational challenges that we haven't planned for, or that we kind of knew were coming based on some expectations that were not fulfilled, but we didn't look at the next step. Um, Again, the workplace flexibility is so important, from changing shifts to changing organizational designations like part-time, full-time, making sure they adhere to the regulations of 30 to 40 hours is full-time and 30 below can be part-time. Look at how you can leverage this opportunity to look for interns. There are platforms where there are interns out there who are degree holders or not, who are looking for an opportunity, and some will work for free or work at a lower rate. And that was interesting for me because we wanted to bring some in just to take care of some projects. When you look at how flexible you are, you have to look at the flexibility from not only the designation, but what will work. Glad you asked that about employee testing. Some of the clients are testing. They are taking temperatures when employees come into the office and when they leave. Some, and they are also asking their employees, obviously, if they've been sick. They have to come back with a service provider's note saying that they either do not have the symptoms or they're not ill. And as a HR consultant, I recommend that our clients do the testing, and that it's a buy-in. Most of the employees welcome it, but I'm a proponent of that, and it meets the requirements. And then again, when everything now is intentional. If you're going to do the testing, you want to make sure that you can get the best tester that you can afford. The discount one may not be the one that provides the consistency and information that you need. And then if you're doing that, then you want to make sure that you include that in your policy manual. You also want to make sure that if you're adopting things like testing, you want to make sure that you let your recruits know that this is what our operation calls for now. And if you're against it, you have to seriously think about whether you want to be a part of our team. What I also think is important, and I kind of heard a chat in the back, and what I recommend is that if you can, call on a physician to come in and have a lunch and learn, whether it's through Zoom or whether if you're on site and you want to bring them in, call on someone from the medical profession to come in and give you and give you their take on these points, on how to address these points. Now, from workplace flexibility, policy manuals, et cetera, they may not be as well versed on that. But when it comes into the play of how do I make our organization much safer? Because I seek that kind of advice out. I want to know from the science world and the medical world on what are the best techniques that I can use as a practitioner to share with my clients. And I think also from the perspective of our center, these seminars are created because of this need. So not only am I doing this on COVID, did I do it on apps? There are other consultants. I don't remember anyone doing anything in the medical area, which is not to say that we couldn't add someone. But when there is a situation that arises that we are not able to respond to, we do the research and get back to you and make referrals. I mean, I think that is the true essence of what we should be doing for our clients at this point. The owner doesn't know and doesn't have all the answers, but you need to be able to reach out to someone that does. Okay. Want to make sure that I covered all my bases here too. When I looked at steps that needed to be taken, checklists are also great, but checklists need to be shared. And these are best practices tips on how to make this work. And so often we cover our checklist. I'm here to say that if you don't share what your expectations are, your employees are not going to know. So if there's a giant checklist that the organization needs, whether it's online and people write in and they, tell what they need to do and who they need help from, introduce something like that. Introduce icebreakers in your staff meeting where it allows employees to, regardless of the size, because the COVID world doesn't differentiate when it comes to how these practices are affected by number. You want to introduce some icebreakers that speak to how are you doing? And it could just be survivor who gets off the island, but how are you doing? Quotes that have gotten them through this. Introduce quotes to them. What speaks to you, what doesn't? Introduce icebreakers about the kinds of things that they're reading, what they like to share. Because it's more, I have found that it's more of a cohesive unit, which I'm very happy about, than it was prior to COVID for most of my clients. And it had a lot to do with their location. But what I also found that's very interesting at this point is that the day for some businesses to return to the office is being extended. And what does that mean? Will some companies ever go back? Some are saying, no, we'll never go back. We're going to make this work. Others see the need to go back because being in the office was better for them. But what it also means is that doing business as we did in the past is in the past. And we're called upon as practitioners and employees to engage in the conversations to make our businesses more flexible, more engaging, more open. If you didn't have a coffee room, even though you can't be in there at the same time, maybe there's something that you can introduce to the organization about how we can do this, which would eliminate another practice. It's wide open now, and what I also thought was so interesting from a global perspective is that human resources is at the table. regardless of what they're calling this function in Australia, because I'm looking at trends all over the world. In England, human resource practitioners are at the table to make these decisions. And I think that's a good thing. Anything else? I think this is my same question. So I want to thank each one of you for participating in this. This isn't an easy topic to present either, because we know that the changes that have been made since we were introduced to COVID may not complement what our future goals were. But again, as I said, this is your opportunity to be a part of the conversation and not sit on the sidelines. And so I hope all of you take the information. Like I said, I have flyers for you that speak to, all the items that I spoke about. You will get a copy of this presentation. I think we also offer a recording, and I also wanted to leave you with the contact information. This is our physical address, but we're not there. We're all working remotely, and initially it was a challenge, but now it's seamless. We have staff meetings, and we're more available to you if there is a business need that you have, that you need assistance from us. Like Priscilla said, we offer technical assistance to startups and more mature businesses, from marketing, to QuickBooks, to business plans, to cybersecurity, to other financial needs that a client may have. And we're also really good at certifying minority women owned businesses, women-owned businesses, disabled, veteran businesses, where we got, and we have a real keen on idea of how to make that work and how to make it successful for our business. So if there are no questions, just unmute and ask. I thank you so much. I'll check again. I'll thank you so much for participating. I hope to see you at some of our other workshops, and have a very good, safe day. Thank you so much.